Welcome back to USCFootball.com, the Peristyle Podcast, Inside Troy on YouTube, wherever you are listening. Welcome back. I am your host, Chris Trevino, and as always, for right now, Connor Morrissette, triple-double. How you doing?
As always, for these spring previews, baby, let's keep knocking them out.
Knocking them down. We just had wide receivers. We've done quarterbacks. We've done running backs. So, Connor, it's time we give the tight ends some love. And if you know me, if you've been listening to me for a long time, going back to the Family Feud, I have bought so much stock in the tight end position for like 6 years. For 6 years, I've been hoarding.
Are you broke?
Stock. Yes, I am very much. I work 7 jobs to fill my stock buying obsession with the tight ends. But we're here in 2025 talking about them for spring camp. Connor, what is the first thing, your early impressions of the USC tight end room going into the spring for 2025?
My first impression is that Lake McCree has led this group in receiving yards in each of the last 3 seasons. He's back again this upcoming season. Is someone going to take that from him? Is some other tight end going to elevate the ceiling of this room, take the tight end room at USC to the next level, and outperform Lake McCree, who's a solid tight end, got off to a great start last season? I think we'd both agree, Chris, he's a good player, not a great player, a great locker room guy, someone you want to have around. But at USC, I think it's acceptable to say, hey, we can have a tight end who's a little bit better here. And they've recruited a little bit better at the tight end spot over the last few years. Lake McCree, he's the wily veteran in the room. On paper, he's going to be that starting tight end for next season. But can one of these young guys come in and take over and transform this position, make it more dangerous than it's been under Lincoln Riley so far?
I think that's the first thing you said is something I gravitated towards. For me, it's the next level.
Yeah.
Like, we've seen the tight end room. They've been fine. You know, they've been not amazing. They've been decent. They've gotten steady to the point where it's like they're not killing us. But now you want to see that next level. And you're right, Lake McCree, very solid tight end. But you're waiting for like a potential star. I don't even want to say superstar. I just want to say star, like someone you could depend on to make a big play moving forward. And that's kind of the big question mark with tight ends moving forward in 2025 and beyond. But you're right. They have done much better recruiting. That room is one of the deepest it's been in quite a long time, which is kind of one of the focal points that we're talking about with this position group. But let's jump into the losing and returning. You're only losing one, and that's Cade Eldridge, who was your second tight end last season, kind of your blocking guy behind Lake McCree. Was a 3-star athlete out of Washington, a guy you needed to develop, did develop a little bit, got stronger, got bigger, learned the position, played running back in high school, so there was some development that needed to go on, but emerged last spring as a guy's like, hey, this is kind of our blocking guy, but then was usurped his position by a young tight end, Walker Lyons, who we're just kind of jumping into the returning because you're only losing him. Cade Eldridge now at Washington, went back home, but not a terrible loss because you still have plenty of bodies in that room. You have redshirt senior Lake McCree coming back, 39 career games over his career at USC. You have the rising sophomore Walker Lyons, who had minimal impact in terms of stats with 6 receptions for 36 yards, but one of the big snap getters for this team after he took over as the second tight end behind Lake McCree. You have redshirt freshman Joey Olson, who was an early enrollee last year. You have redshirt freshman Walter Matthews, who was a summer enrollee. And then kind of one of the big question marks is Carson Tabarachi, who did not play last year, had multiple injuries going on. Don't really know what's going on with him moving into 2025. So there's a chance he's not a part of this room in spring, maybe a medical redshirt coming. That's just kind of pure speculation. That's the guy, who moved from linebacker to tight end and then has battled injuries the last couple of years. Something to keep an eye on. But if he's in that room, he's kind of that H-back, perfect weapon as an H-back. But again, health has been kind of the big thing from him since moving over from linebacker as a Utah transfer a couple years ago. I believe 2022, Lincoln Riley's first season here. So that is a name to keep an eye on. But for right now, he is considered part of this returning group, but pretty deep overall, Connor.
It's a lot of bodies. Now it's time for someone to separate, like we talked about off the top. I think McCree will come in as that starting tight end, like we hit on to begin this segment, but then someone has to establish themselves or just show a little bit more promise than we've seen out of that Walker Lyons, Carson Taparachi, Joey Olson, Walter Matthews group. And it's really anyone's game right now because last season, did anyone from that group really grab you and say, hey, I need to be playing more snaps? We saw Lyons play a little bit. We saw Olson not really play much at all, but I do think he got one snap in one of these games. Walter Matthews didn't see the field at all. And what's interesting, Chris, is Lyons, looking at some of these recruiting rankings, number 116 in his class in the composite. Walter Matthews, number 185 in the composite. Joey Olson, number 287 in the composite. These are three guys who are top 200 recruits who have multiple years of experience outside of Lyons. It's fair to say, like, let's see what you got now. I want to see a little bit more from this group.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of the big thing. Show us more. Get us to another level where we have a legitimate tight end threat on the field for the offense and do enough where, hey, Lincoln Riley can't take us off the field because we're having impact on the game. I feel like that's kind of been the talking point of every tight end coach here has been like, we got to do enough. We got to make plays where, they don't want to take us off the field and not put in the extra wide receiver. No, we have to be able to be having impact in the passing game and blocking. And obviously they got more run as blockers last year when there was issues with the offensive line. That was something we saw a lot of 3 tight end sets going out there. So they made their money as blockers. They got their reps as blockers last season, but you want to be able to see them catching passes. Like Walker Lyons, 6 receptions last year. Lake McCree has just 3 touchdowns in his career at USC in 39 games. That's not great for an impact tight end. Obviously, he is, a dependable guy for them, will be the leader of that room, but you want to see more touchdowns across the board for this room. I don't think a tight end had a touchdown last year, if I recall correctly. I don't think Lake McCree found the end zone, so a tight end did not score in 2024. I have to check on that stat, but I'm pretty sure that is the stat. 0 touchdowns for that tight end room. And I guess we can kind of parlay into new faces because we're kind of just talking about them as an entire group. You have the true freshman Nella Tupou, a 6'4", 220-pound prospect out of Folsom, California, former teammate of Walker Lyons up there in Folsom, and the number 44 athlete, was kind of being recruited as a defensive lineman for Utah, but USC was able to flip him kind of late in the process. So he is another interesting body type in this room. And we're not kind of talking about it as a technical new face, but Chad Savage is your new tight ends coach, by way of Colorado State. So at least for him, the cupboard is full in terms of the body types and experience, and having a veteran guy like Lake McCree. And you just have a lot of talent to work with. Now it's time for you to get that talent fulfilled on the field and catching passes and catching first downs and making impact in the red zone and in the end zone in the end.
On Tupou, I know RJ really likes his film and thinks that he has a higher ceiling than maybe his recruiting ranking indicates. I don't know for sure if he's just going to come in and play in this loaded, maybe not loaded, but deep tight end room. But if what's happened continues where it's sort of just run-of-the-mill tight end play, no one really steps up, could Tupou come in and do something? It's not out of the realm of possibility. I'd bet towards no rather than yes, but I know RJ is very high on him, and he's someone who, again, if the established guys in front of him aren't playing at the level that you'd expect, he maybe could come in and play well. So I don't know how much of his tape you've had a chance to watch, Chris, but RJ told me he's very high on Tupou.
No, people believe that Nella, despite the ranking being a 3-star guy and not kind of a true tight end prospect as kind of an athlete, can be both ways. Very athletic and kind of broke out last season as a receiver. I think he had 573 yards, which is great for a tight end at the high school level. You don't see a lot of tight ends with stats like that unless they're one of their top receiving weapons. Obviously had a really good quarterback in Ryder Lyons throwing to him. So Nella has production, at least in his final year there. So he's got a good momentum rolling into spring camp. And yeah, I don't think a lot of people are talking about him because you have some redshirt freshmen. A lot of people are circling Joey Olson as a guy, a guy who was an early enrollee, made some plays, but kind of like Xavier Jordan in our wide receiver preview, made some plays in the spring, but then we didn't hear about him, was on the scout team. And then Walter Matthews dealt with an injury, but 6'7", biggest tight end in the room. So there's a lot of different body types, and we'll talk about that with my strengths and weaknesses for this unit. But yeah, it feels wide open though, because if you told me, oh, Nella emerged as your second tight end in spring over Walker Lyons, I'd be like, okay. Walker Lyons, I don't think he was on my kind of radar to be the number 2 tight end at some point this year, coming off a Mormon mission where he didn't play football for a year and then broke his leg in his senior year. So it was kind of technically 2 years away from football. He just kind of stepped right in and was having an impact and kind of emerged there quickly in fall camp when he arrived. So I think it's easy for someone to kind of jump in and grab some reps in this room.
I did say earlier that a lot of these guys have had multiple years. I meant they're going into their second year, so established in the sense of they've had one. So it is still early in a lot of these guys' careers, but the overarching thing with this group is just what I've watched and then what I've heard. It doesn't really sound like anyone has truly separated themselves so far. It's before spring camp has even happened yet. So like I'm talking more about last season and then now. We'll see what happens going into this year, but I don't think it's totally out of line to say you'd hope that one of these guys would have established themselves in their first year on campus, or at least shown, hey, you can really rely on me. And I don't know if we necessarily had that in the first season, but it's a crazy world of college football where you have so many guys getting more years of eligibility. It's trending towards being way older, which is why McCree is back. He's going to be coming into his 4th year, I think, fifth year at USC.
Walked at senior day, but coming back.
Yeah, so the fact that some of these guys are young and haven't had a huge impact so far, that's, of course, not the end of the world. But I think it's fair to say, hey, in this first year with a lot of these guys being top 300 recruits, pretty much everyone in the room, you would want to see a little bit more.
Absolutely. Are you buying into the Walker Lyons breakout 2025? Because that seems to be one of those trendy picks. Walker Lyons, put him down as maybe your leading receiver out of the tight end room.
It's certainly possible, but I don't think I'm
You're not there yet?
I'm not totally there yet.
Okay,
I want to
that's fine.
see. We'll see how much we can see in spring practice. But right now, I'd be pretty confident that Lake McCree would be the leader in that group. If Lyons takes a big step forward in the offseason, you mentioned how he broke his leg and then had the mission, so he was out of football for a little bit. Maybe he just needed that first year to get up to speed. That would not surprise me if he has that breakout. But there was nothing I saw last season where it was okay, wow, you got something here in the passing game.
I think it's just because kind of Walker is the most complete out of the tight ends. He's probably the most athletic from a pound-for-pound standpoint. He's the best blocker in terms of, he blocked in high school, and Lake McCree was kind of a flexed-out receiver, kind of like Joey Olsen. Joey Ocean is the nickname we have for him on the composite, so I slip into that sometimes. But Joey Olsen was also a flexed-out wide receiver. Walter Matthews, 6'7", as I said. Walker Lyons, 6'5", 6'4" range. He's the most complete guy who can be a good blocker and a weapon in the passing game. So as the most complete guy, I think that's why guys or fans gravitate toward him being kind of the breakout for 2025, and maybe a guy who can eat into Lake McCree's kind of stranglehold as the only really passing game weapon, which is minimal at that, because obviously 3 touchdowns over his career here. It's not that much, but yeah, definitely their leader in terms of a passing threat in the room. But maybe that changes in 2025 with Walker Lyons or someone else.
Could Joey Olsen get there? Could he be someone who breaks out?
I'm surprised he did not get more run, because based on what we're hearing in camp, he was making plays as a receiver. But obviously, if you're not blocking well, you're not going to get on the field as a tight end. So potentially that was holding him back. But if he's made a stride in that development or that department, as a blocker, yeah, I think we could see more Joey Olsen / Ocean in 2025. Yeah, because he was a really good receiver out of Oregon in high school. So yeah, he's got the skill sets to be a really good pass catcher. Kind of reminds me of Lake McCree, who was a pass catcher out of Texas, had some knee injuries, but Joey Olsen, I think, has a higher ceiling in that regard as maybe a more complete tight end.
I wouldn't be surprised then if it's him who does well in the receiving department with Deuce Robinson gone and Prince Strachan coming in. That's sort of a direct replacement, but there aren't too many really tall receivers on this team. I mean, Lane, of course, but then outside of him, there's an opening there on the roster potentially for a bigger body. So maybe he is used a little bit as a receiver in some packages. We'll have to see. If the blocking comes along, then that would, of course, help Olsen's chances at playing. So that's a huge part of it, of course. But, yeah, like you said, he was the one guy we sort of heard good things about in camp when we're not able to watch a ton of practice. So
and then poof.
Yeah, and then we didn't really see it during the season, though.
And I will say this about Joey. I think when he signed, he was like 210, 215. Mm-hmm. But then when we saw him in spring, he was like 240. Like, he put on some size in his arms. So I'm excited to see what he looks like this spring when he comes out of the tunnel. Like, how much more weight has he put on? What does that look like now? Because he definitely changed his body in that first year in just a short amount of time when he was an early enrollee. So let's see what another full off season for him looks like in terms of, building size. And speaking of size, Walter Matthews is a guy we hear about from the fans a lot. Like, Walter Matthews, 6'7". Like, what's that going to look like? 4-star out of Georgia. Like, this is his time. And there's this like running joke that I think he should be, or he's going to become, an offensive tackle, because yes, when I look at him, I see someone who is an offensive tackle, but this is going to be that first real look at Walter Matthews as a tight end. Again, 6'7", 250 pounds. If you see him move, I still feel like it's potential to be an offensive lineman. But hey, benefit of the doubt, give him a shot to be a tight end, and we'll see what it looks like. I don't really know what to expect. He's a big mystery guy for me. Like, I don't know what we're gonna look. I don't know what Walter Matthews getting opportunity is going to look like in 2025.
When we were able to watch stretches and warm-ups before that got canceled, halfway through the season, so we got to see him warm up and run routes for the first half of the season last year, and he did not move around very well, and maybe that had something to do with an injury in the Las Vegas Bowl during warm-ups. He didn't play in the game on offense, but I thought he was moving much better, so maybe he's someone that you can rely on moving forward. Health concerns behind him now, so he's someone else to watch too. But I shared what you saw too, Chris, when he just didn't really move that great to start his career, and maybe that was because of an injury, something not in his control. If we can watch warm-ups moving forward, hopefully during the spring we'll be able to see something. How he moves around is going to tell me a lot.
Potentially another big red zone weapon at 6'7". Put him out there with Prince Strawn or Jacoby Lane, a wide receiver. You got some size right there. So let's move on to our strengths and weaknesses. What is your strength for this room, Connor?
Depth, a lot of bodies. It's filled with top recruits too, like I mentioned earlier. So that has to be the strength. There's potential there. There's a large number of bodies. The room, it sort of seems to me, Chris, like Zach Hansen's recruiting strategy was, let's just throw some darts at the dartboard and whatever we hit, we'll take. It's the tight end. It's Lincoln Riley's offense. We haven't seen like a Mark Andrews type guy at USC, of course, but there's a chance that one of these players can step up and have a pretty big role in the passing game. And that to me sort of looked like the recruiting strategy. Let's look at a lot of these top guys. We like a lot of them. Let's bring them in. And one of them should be able to establish himself, and let's see who it is.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you. Deep, versatile. That's kind of my thoughts when looking at this room. You have a bunch of different body types. You got a 6'7" guy. You got a 6'4" guy. You got a 6'2" guy. And Carson Tabarachi could be kind of an H-back role. There's a lot of different ways you can use these guys. So you have options if you're Chad Savage to kind of play around with the look and how you deploy these guys for Lincoln Riley's offense. My weakness, though, is they're still pretty young overall. I mean, Joey Olsen, Walter Matthews, Carson Tabarachi, one snap between them last season. And then Walker Lyons, still really young and still kind of shaking off the rust of that kind of 2 missed years as a football player. And then Nella is obviously a true freshman, hasn't played at all. So a lot of different body types and they're deep, but still pretty young in terms of their experience.
My weakness, I have young like you, and then who will separate? It's different with the receivers where we saw Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane separate last season. And again, a lot of those tight ends last year were in their first year, so it would have been too much to ask them to separate. But we heard things about Lemon and Lane in the offseason behind closed doors, like, okay, hey, watch out for these guys, watch out for these guys. That's what I've been hinting at this whole show. I haven't really heard much of that from the tight ends. it's time for someone to separate. And the fact that someone has to, it's not necessarily a weakness because someone I'm sure probably will, but like the fact that you don't know right now has to be a weakness.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Big mystery box the tight end room is, and we'll see what we're going to get in 2025. Final thoughts, which is basically our early starter projections. I feel like we're pretty unanimous on the number one tight end, but what does that 2 and 3 spot look like? Because those are kind of the top 3 in terms of getting on the field.
Lake is the starter, like we talked about. We agree on that. And then based on what happened last year, Walker Lyons is that number 2 guy, I think, especially with USC losing the tight end who went to Washington, who was the backup. It was
Cade Eldridge.
Thank you, Cade Eldridge. So Lyons looks like that number 2 guy, but maybe Joey Olsen pushes him. So I have those 2 guys next. And then I think after that, you're looking at Carson Tabaracci, Walter Matthews, Nella Tupou. It's going to be a mix of those guys. But there's a lot that needs to be worked out. It's kind of like the quarterback room where you feel good about the starter, but then you don't really know what the depth looks like in terms of an order.
I'm going to go Olsen. I feel like Olsen could have a really big spring. Just, kind of the older guy in terms of the redshirt freshman. And Nella obviously has been there a year, going back to being an early last year. So I think Joey Olsen has a chance to be that number 3 tight end. But again, as we just alluded to, not really sure what we're going to get, who is going to step up in that room outside of Lake, and then the momentum that Walker has based off his 2024 season and kind of ascending to that number 2 spot. Who is going to challenge him and who is going to grab that number 3 spot? Is it Carson? Is he healthy? Is Joey Olsen ready? Is Walter Matthews ready to be the guy after, battling some injuries last year? Or is Nella just going to come out of nowhere? So big mystery grab bag. We'll see what we're going to grab in 2025. We have our final question for this roundup from Max Rexroad, which is another elite name in terms of our question submitters. What do they tell you? Sorry, I cut off the first part here. If you're recruiting tight ends, what do they tell you to get to come to USC? SC has no recent history of effectively using tight ends.
My answer is $signs. That's what it starts with. That's the biggest recruiting pitch here. But it's a good question because really there isn't much of a what's the word I'm looking for?
History?
Yeah, history. Just Riley, like he did so well with Mark Andrews.
Yeah.
And then maybe at Oklahoma there were other guys, but at USC there hasn't been the tight end that if you're a high school tight end, you see a guy at USC, I can be that. You're probably thinking like, oh, they don't use tight ends a whole lot. So in terms of the recruiting pitch, that is something that they'll have to work on. And I just wonder how that affects a guy like Mark Bowman, who reclassified and 5-star tight end. Like, are other schools negatively recruiting against USC saying they're not going to use you right? I wouldn't be surprised if that's happening. So to answer the question, it's money, but outside of that, they don't really have a ton.
I put this question in here because it doesn't specifically talk about a single person or kind of a spring thing, but I thought it was interesting because you mentioned the name Mark Bowman, the elite 5-star tight end that reclassified from 2027. I believe he was like number 4 in the country, and Gerard loves him. He calls him kind of the best tight end prospect to come out of California in quite some time.
What about Brock Bowers?
That is a question I will have to talk about with him. He mentioned Brock Bowers, but I don't remember what he said specifically in terms of Mark Bowman. But Gerard, very high on Mark Bowman. Now in 2026, I don't know where he ranks among the tight ends, but do you think we'll see more tight end usage just because they are recruiting Mark Bowman and they really want Mark Bowman? Chad Savage has made it clear like that's kind of his top tight end prospect. Do we see more tight end usage because you're going to be recruiting Mark Bowman's like, hey, look, we can get the ball to the tight ends? Could we see a Mark Bowman recruiting bump in 2025 for USC's tight ends?
That's a very good question. I'll spin it back with another question.
Oh.
Will we see Walker Lyons continue to play a good amount because USC's recruiting his brother so strongly? I do wonder if that played into Lyons playing so much last season, trying to entice the 5-star quarterback. You always have to think like that, right?
Yeah.
You always have to put your thinking cap on and say, hey, like, are there any other reasons for guys being used the way that they're being used? Is there an ulterior motive? Does recruiting play a role? So to answer your question, I think that's certainly possible. And then with mine, like if Lyons has cooled on USC a little bit, which it looks like, does that affect his brother's usage? Now, if Walker Lyons comes out and has a great spring camp and earns it, we're not even considering that for a consideration. But like last year, when Lake McCree goes down, you really don't have another tight end. Hey, we're recruiting this guy's brother. He's beaten out these other tight ends maybe by a smaller margin than we would hope, or maybe, I'm reading a lot into it. What I'm trying to say is there wasn't a clear backup behind McCree. We're recruiting this kid's brother. Let's put him in, and maybe that'll help us try to get his brother locked down. I think that's a part of it too. So yeah, we always have to be thinking like that. How can the usage affect recruiting? And in Bowman's instance with Chad Savage now being there, maybe he says, hey, I want to use the tight ends a little bit more because that'll help us get this player. I think that's certainly a part of it.
Anytime Mark Bowman is in the Coliseum for a game, bet on the tight ends to get some yards or a touchdown. But I think we will see a little bit of a bump just because you are kind of recruiting an elite guy in this class, and because this is the best tight end room you've had since Lincoln Riley's been here. Because I think that was another missing piece about it, is that when he arrived here, tight end room wasn't that great. It was injury riddled. There was not a lot of depth. Their talent was kind of below average. So Zach Hansen has had to rebuild the room, and he did. I think he did a good job of getting these guys in. As you mentioned, a lot of these guys are top 300 guys, 4-star guys. So you're set up to have a potential breakout year. But I feel like we've been talking about a breakout year for the tight end room for quite some time. It's why I have $2.9 million in tight end stock wasting away and eating a hole in my bank account. So at some point, I need them to move into the black? The black is good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I need them to move into the black. So is 2025 the year? I don't know. I like it better than any year. I've talked about this before because you kind of have this kind of guy you're trying to recruit in Mark Bowman, and you have a deep, talented room. Let's see if someone could be that security blanket for Jaden Maeva and this offense.
And remember, the receiver room isn't totally deep either, so maybe that plays into the tight end
cut into that
being used more.
Great
in
point.
The passing game. Yeah, so we'll see what happens in the portal too. I don't anticipate USC going after a tight end. That would surprise me unless some all-world guy enters and it's like, oh, that could really
Brock Bowers kind of guy
benefit our team. Yeah, but again, that's probably unlikely. So it'll depend maybe on what happens with the receivers in the portal for USC. That could affect how much the tight ends are used in the pass game. But right now, if the moves are minimal, and this is the roster that USC will have going into the fall for the most part, we could see the tight ends play more and be more involved in the passing attack because there just aren't that many receivers who have a lot of production in their careers.
As you can see, a lot of factors pointing to a potential upward trend for USC's tight ends in 2025. But again, we'll see what that looks like early in spring camp. I'm Chris. That is Connor. That's going to wrap up our tight end positional preview for the tight end position. Check out our other ones on offense and our other ones on defense coming in the near future.